you for coming. I hope you enjoyed the food. Thank you, Persimmon, for always supplying great food for us. We have a full house. I appreciate that, too. Looks like we have one seat left by John. John, what did you do? You went to Cabo. Nobody wants to sit by you because you're so darn tan. We're not getting that. I wish I had a banker's joke today. I wish I would have known there was going to be so many money people here today, but I have no banker joke. My name is Lynn Snodgrass. I'm the CEO of the Best Darn Chamber in Oregon, soon to be the Best Darn Chamber in the Pacific Northwest. Ruth, you tell everybody in the state that. Challenge them all. I'm glad you're here, and the first thing I'd like to do is to introduce our sponsors. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Riverview Bank, and I'm not sure there's anybody left at the branch. We want to recognize Larry Schwartz is here, Brenda Felix, Casey Ryan, and Brianna Wecker. Thank you for sponsoring the event today. Applause, applause. Thank you. That's Riverview Community Bank. And I also want to thank our stakeholder sponsors, Portland General Electric. John, thank you very much. And Gresham Barlow School District. And a special thank you to our media sponsor, MetroEast Community Media. Keith, thank you. And it's always difficult when there's a little hitch in the giddy up, because the hitch is usually very obvious, and that hitch was happening earlier. Keith, thank you very much. And just as a reminder, on your way out, you can pick up one of these forms, and anything that was said today, you can watch again at the rebroadcast. We would like to recognize elected officials that are here today. I'm going to call out the 4 that I have seen here, but there may be other elected people, school board, water, fire district, etc. But I want to recognize the mayor of Gresham, Mayor Shane Bemis. Mayor, thank you very much. And a mayor of a neighboring town, Mayor Casey Ryan. Casey, thank you for being here. We have 2 counselors here. We have the president of the Gresham Chamber, the Gresham Council, Kirk French. Kirk, thank you. Sorry, it just flows out. Chamber this, chamber that. You should see me at home. Drake, would you wash the chamber dishes? And I also want to introduce the newest counselor for the Gresham City Council, and that is Janine Gladfelter. Janine. And I want to recognize our board members today. Boy, John, you're getting a lot of press. John Maloney is the board member for the Gresham Chamber. And the past president, Warner Allen. Warner, thank you. Well, I read once when somebody asked a small business owner, "What do you do?" And that person answered, "Whatever it takes." And I think we can all relate to that. Whether we're in a small business or a corporation, when you want to do your job well, you do whatever you can do to get it done. And our guest speaker today is definitely a help in helping us get that done. You're going to love Ruth. She's, well, I'll let the chair of the council introduce her. In fact, Brian, I'm going to bring you up now. I'd like to introduce Brian Lessler. He is the owner of Brian Lessler PDG Construction, and he's the chair of the Government Affairs Council. Brian?
Wow, it's a great turnout today. But then we have a great speaker, and I'm very happy to introduce Ruth Miles to you. So if someone said that I'm from the government and I'm here to help, most of us would probably run the other direction. But I want to ask you, don't run or hide. Don't slam the door on our speaker, because Ruth means it, and she actually does help. Ruth is a repeat appearance, she has been here before. And Ruth knows Gresham. In fact, she lives here. Ruth also knows small business. She has been a small business owner, and Ruth knows the complications Salem can impose on businesses, as she saw that up close and personal when she was a legislative staffer in Salem for about 9 years. Ruth understands firsthand the challenges entrepreneurs face and the policy issues behind them. For almost 3 years, Ruth has crisscrossed Oregon to visit with business owners, chambers of commerce, nonprofits, and community partners to hear their concerns about getting caught up in red tape with the government. And everywhere she goes, she runs with scissors, trying her best to cut through that red tape. please welcome Ruth Miles. I know you're going to find what she has to say very interesting. Pleasure.
Well, hello. So I am not accustomed to staying in one place when I'm speaking, so I'm going to try because I understand the reasons that I should do that for this group. But if I start to, move around or come down off the step, somebody just catch me. First, I just want to say thank you for having me here today. I'm so grateful because I do make Gresham my home. We've lived here for almost 30 years, and I'm a proud resident. The only sort of fly in the ointment is that I've chosen a line of work over these past 15 years or so that's taken me out of town early in the morning, only to return late at night. So what I get are long walks with my dog in the dusk and weekends in the most beautiful town in the state of Oregon. So, but I did own a business in Gresham and then moved it to a village and still actually have that business to this day. But and I'm seeing a couple of folks in the audience that have known me since I was a baby business owner. And Sue, I'm going to call you out. You're one of those folks that saw me go through lots of struggles and was a wise person. And I also wanted to share with you that the reason I'm here representing the Secretary of State is entirely due to the Gresham Chamber of Commerce. I was a member of the board and representing my tiny little business, and I received a scholarship to participate in the Gresham Chamber's leadership program 1 year. And I was excited. I hadn't thought of investing in myself to do that for myself as a business owner, but the chamber paid my freight. And I, during that leadership program, for the very first time, met my state legislators, met the speaker at that time, who was Karen Menace, and started to form relationships and started to realize that I was interested in policy, that I might be able to make a difference that would affect my business in a positive way and possibly other people's businesses. And so I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that for me. So, sorry, teary moment aside, I'm going to, rather than telling you about my office, which I think you some way know about, but I'm going to talk about a case that we worked on in my office. And I'm going to take a risk with you guys because I'm at home and I want you to know about an emergent issue that is a problem in our state that we think we've got some fix around. But this is a case that we couldn't solve in my office. So I'll tell you a little bit more about cases we could solve later on. But first I want to talk about this, and you'll get a sense of what it looks like to do the work that we do as small business advocates in the state. So I got a call from a state senator, and he said, Ruth, we've got a business in my district in Southern Oregon, and she needs your help. Can you give her a call? So I called down there, and I talked with the owner, Sharon, and she's owned a business for about 30 years. So she's pretty savvy. She knows what she's about. She's been doing this for a long time. And she said, we've had such a great run at this that we need to increase our capacity. So we went out and looked for embroidery equipment. We had to buy new embroidery equipment. We just didn't have enough to keep up with the demand for the services. So she found some used equipment in a neighboring county. She went down and checked it out one weekend. It was in great shape. It was at a great price point. So she paid cash on the barrelhead. She got a bill of sale. She took the equipment back to her operation. And then the following January 1st, she added it to the list of equipment that she declares on her personal property tax return. So that's business personal property. So those of you who are business owners, you know that the personal property in your business is the stuff that you use to do business. It's not inventory, but it's manufacturing equipment. It's tables and chairs that you're sitting in here, say for Persimmon. It's all of the things that they're serving, the chafing dishes that they're using. So all of that is business personal property, and it's taxed if you get to a certain level. So, and I think that level is $16,000 worth of stuff. So if you have $16,000 worth of stuff, and thinking about this only at market value, not depreciated value, then you get a tax bill from the county. So the counties are taxing every business on this if they have that $16,000 or above mark. So Sharon was accustomed to this because she has essentially what is light manufacturing. She's got a lot of equipment, so she's at tens and tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. So she's already been paying this bill, and she adds this new equipment to her bill. So she's paying taxes in her own county. So 18 months after she gets this equipment into her office and into her operation and started using it, She gets a bill from that neighboring county where she purchased it. I see a couple of heads nodding. 18 months later, this is a year and a half, she gets this bill, and it's not even to her, it's to a person that she doesn't know, and it's to her business address. So she dithers. Do I open it? Do I not? Is it a federal offense? I don't know. So she finally opens it. She's the only business at that location. So she opens this envelope up, and inside there's a tax bill for almost $8,000. So she calls up this neighboring county's tax clerk, and she says, this is not for me. It's not for me because I don't have a physical nexus in your county. I have only, over the past 30 years of doing business, shipped finished goods to your county, just like I do to all the counties in Oregon and a bunch outside the state as well. So why would you send me a bill? They said, well, it's actually for you. It's actually for you. Yeah. An $8,000 bill. So she said, wait a second, what's the deal with that? And they said, well, you're not actually, I mean, you have to pay the bill, but somebody else incurred the tax. So she called her senator and she said, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem right at all. And he called me and I called her. So we started to work with the Department of Revenue and then the county to ask about, why would this be that a business owner would have a bill of that size come to her when she doesn't have a physical nexus in that county? And here is what happened. So that equipment that she bought was purchased from someone who was liquidating their own business. He had an imprints business, was ready to get out of it for whatever reason and leave the state, retire, I don't know, move to Jamaica. But he had tried to sell this equipment before, and he'd sold it to a young woman who wanted to start her own imprints business in that neighboring county. And she could not afford to pay cash the way Sharon could, but he agreed he would carry a contract on this equipment. So she bought a ton of stuff, not just the stuff that Sharon bought, but a bunch of stuff. And she basically bought the contents of the business so she could start her own imprints business. And it's actually not a very bad idea to do. She started making monthly payments the way their agreement was, and pretty soon she was late on one, then she missed one altogether, and then she stopped paying. So he had to repossess that equipment. So it's what you have to do. He gets it back, and he has no idea what's happened. Then this time he's going to sell it to a cash buyer. So he prices it at a low price. Sharon comes in, the equipment's in great shape. She buys it, she takes it to her place. She starts paying taxes on it. What that gentleman and what Sharon didn't know is that young woman who was starting her own business did not know that she needed to file a personal property tax return with the county. And the county, in the meantime, called the gentleman who had been filing a personal property tax return of some substance and said, hey, so we didn't see that. And he said, hey, so I'm out of business. And I sold the equipment to that person. Then I repossessed it and I sold it to this person. So go find your money elsewhere. I'm not the person who is liable. Because here's the thing about personal property tax, it's a point in time assessment. I call it the hot potato tax. This is the way I understand it. So whoever has the potato or the embroidery equipment at January 1st, 1 a.m., pays the tax for the year, right? Super simple. But also weird when you're selling equipment and buying it and repossessing. So Sharon didn't know about any of these transactions that had happened ahead of that, because it's not as if embroidery equipment has a title that you can do a search on. She couldn't check as if you would, say you were buying a boat or a plane or a floating home or an office building where you can do a title search. You can find out whether or not there's tax debt associated with it. It didn't even enter her mind, savvy businesswoman that she is, that there might be some need to check. However, she found out when she got that $8,000 bill, and just so you know, that bill was about $4,000 and change in base tax and about $3,000 and change in penalties and interest for not paying timely. And it turns out that the reason why she was liable to pay that bill is that the other people who had owned the equipment and were responsible for paying that personal property tax could not be found by the county. They had no assets in Oregon. So there was no ability for those people to pay because they couldn't be found. And Oregon statute, and this has been in place for quite a while, and I'm sure former Commissioner McKeel could speak to this, it's been in place for a long time, but I didn't know about this as a business owner until I worked on this case. There's a statute that says if the person that previously owned this equipment in the state of Oregon didn't pay and can't be found, the county can collect from the new owner. That's what it comes down to. Who knew that? I was absolutely blown away. This is not a new thing. This is not something that somebody dreamed up. It's been there in statute for a long time. And periodically, it rears its ugly head. It's not super often, but it's often enough that I feel the need to tell you about this so that you know how to protect yourselves. And so this was one of those horrible situations where I had to go back to the senator and say, I'm really sorry, but we can't solve this case. We can't get the county to write off the amount of the tax, because in that county, they really needed the resources. They have a fiduciary duty to the citizens of the county, and they could not afford to write off an $8,000 tax bill. If this had happened in Multnomah or Washington County, the chances of it being written off would be much higher. But that's a decision that's made by county commissioners, not by someone who is a small business advocate. And so I couldn't push the county to do that. All I could do was ask whether or not they would consider it, and they respectfully said no. So knowing that, I had to go back to the senator and say, okay, here's all of the statutory reasons why she has to pay the bill and why we can't get her out of this some way. And so this good senator went to work, and he got the counties in a room with the Corporation Division of Secretary of State, with the tax clerks, so the assessors and the collectors associations, got everybody in a room with the Department of Revenue as well, and started talking about what could we do to protect businesses? How could we make it a way for business owners to know before you purchase a piece of used equipment that would be subject to personal property tax? How would you know? And so what they did is they passed legislation, signed into law, became fully effective January 1st, 2016. And this law gives you a 3-step process where you can determine whether or not there's tax debt associated with it, and sort of acts like a get out of jail free card. So really quickly, and I have some handouts about this, so don't freak out if you're not catching everything. I'm going to go through it really fast so I can talk about other stuff, because this is not my favorite case to talk about. But first thing that you would do, if you're going to buy a piece of equipment, say you're going to buy a used pizza oven. I'm going to pick on you, Mayor Bemis. So if you're going to buy that used pizza oven, and say you go to Baker City because you can get a great deal on that. So you're going to ask the seller for a disclosure statement. I'll give you a list of all the things that need to be in that disclosure statement, but essentially you're looking to find out who was the previous owner, and is there in fact a chain of ownership in the state of Oregon? Who were those people and who were the businesses? And then you get that signed and dated. Dated is important. And you do this within, by the way, 3 days of your purchase. So 3 days before to 3 days after. Second thing you do, once you've got that name or that list of names, that chain of ownership in the state of Oregon, you call the county, or you go into the county and you see the tax clerk and you say, is there any tax debt associated with this stuff that I'm going to buy that was previously owned by these people? And they'll check, and they'll say yes or no. And if they say yes, they may have to do some work to figure out whether or not the tax bill needs to be sort of prorated. Prorated is a bad word, but if you're buying a portion of a business's assets versus the whole thing, they may have to do some work to give you an exact number. Hopefully, let's just assume they say no. So they say no. The disclosure statement you've got says, no, we don't know of any tax debt. And then as a fail-safe, you go online to sos.oregon.gov. That's the Secretary of State website. Click the business button and then click the big green UCC button. That's the Uniform Commercial Code database. And you can perform a search of that database, which is pretty much an unsecured debt database, but we have retrofitted it in the background so that counties can directly populate that database with personal property tax debt that they intend to collect on. So maybe not the small stuff. You know, if there's a $100 bill floating out there, or there's a $500 bill floating out there, that's probably not something that a county would choose to do. However, the first one, just to give you an example, was populated, the very first day it was possible, by Clackamas County. And the tax warrant was for $26,000 and change. It was for a doctor's office in Oregon City. We don't know who. We can find out, though, if we do a search. So that if you buy an exam table in Oregon City, I would just really encourage you to do your due diligence. So that's the last step you do. And hopefully your search of the UCC database using that previous owner or owners' names comes up with no debt showing. So you print the results of your search page. No return results, right? So now you have 3 pieces of documentation which you hold onto. You hold onto this. And if you are to receive a tax bill, if you receive one like Sharon did, you pull out that documentation and you show it to the county so that they know that you did your due diligence ahead of time. And that gets you out of paying the bill because you have done your due diligence. So this is new legislation, and the thing that is important about this is that I've talked to a number of tax assessors throughout the state and tax collectors. And it's been a really interesting learning process for me because I really thought that this only applied to businesses. But I learned, I was talking with, I think it was the Umatilla County tax assessor one day, and I was asking some questions about this because you sort of have to get up to speed on this whole thing just to do the case. And he said, well, if a nonprofit purchased equipment like that, we would do exactly the same thing. We'd have to collect from them as well. Because again, we still have a fiduciary responsibility to our citizens. And if a bad actor comes into town, or somebody who, through ignorance or whatever reason, doesn't file a personal property tax return, doesn't pay personal property tax that they owe to the county, that is supposed to be used for the citizens of the county can't be held responsible for that. And so because of that, this is a particularly important piece of legislation. So if you have a nonprofit and you buy used equipment to furnish your offices or to do the work of your nonprofit, be aware of this, that if it is of a substantial enough value that it would be worth the county to collect on, you should do this process. It literally only takes 10 to 15 minutes if you're doing it right. And if you have any concerns about whether or not you're doing it right, please don't hesitate to call. And my cards are on the table, and my cell phone number is on those cards. You have no excuse at this point. No excuse whatsoever. So I'd rather have you call if you're unsure. Call if you're not clear. Call if you're not getting a clear answer from the county. But here's the thing. We have yet to get a call from someone who has had problems going through that simple 3-step process to say, oh no, that didn't work for me. We haven't had that call. We haven't had the call from businesses saying, oh, that's too much work. Too much work to ensure that there's no tax debt associated with this. Too much work to spend 10 minutes. So thankfully, it's working at this point. And the thing is, it's working not just for you, it's working for the counties. It is important that the counties are able to collect without undue hardship, because the more hardship they have in collecting, the less the less money that flows into the county coffers and can be used for services. So that's Sharon's case. Just so you know, Sharon did eventually have to pay that bill. But she found a way to do it in a very informal way that had a much lower impact on her business. And if you want to hear about the story afterwards, I'm happy to tell you the backstory on that. But she came out in the end and said, Ruth, this is kind of tuition in the school of life. Kind of more expensive than I had anticipated paying at this point in my business life, but it's behind me. So good news on that front. So I want to tell you about a couple of cases that are a little bit more like what we normally do, and then we'll get into talking about some of the data and trends that we gather. So in my office, we were originally started in 2014, January 2014, and this was as a result of legislative action at the request of then Secretary of State Kate Brown. And Governor Brown, her idea was that we should have somebody who can help businesses if they have a problem with state government. So really simple sort of proposition. And so she posed this to legislators who agreed that we should do this. And so our original mandate was just to help for-profit businesses with 100 employees or less. That's our small, 100 employees or less, or no employees at all, when they have a problem with an executive branch state agency. So that's all state agencies, boards, and commissions except Secretary of State, Bureau of Labor and Industry, Treasury, and DOJ, Department of Justice. So just those 4 exceptions. Then in 2016, Governor Brown introduced a bill to expand the mandate of our office. She said, let's not just have you work at the state level, let's have you work all the way down to the local government level. So including cities, schools, counties, metro regional government, special districts of all kinds. So that's now added. She said, we don't want you to just help for-profits. We want to put in code that you can help not-for-profits as well. And why? Because nonprofits have many of the same concerns that for-profit businesses have. Some of the same business processes, payroll, benefits, employment department, revenue department, all of that stuff. Plus the unique set of issues that nonprofits face that are different from for-profits. Also needing help and needing an ombudsman, someone who could step in and objectively help And the third thing she said was, let's not wait till it gets to the problem stage. Let's have you help businesses who are just getting started. We already know, statistics tell us that people start businesses at this very high rate, and most of them fail. They fail, and it is expensive, and it's painful, and it's often a financial event that people do not recover from until they're quite a bit older. And if you think about starting a business when you're already older, like me, that could be a real problem. It could be a real problem financially, right? And so the governor's thought was, let's get at this early on. Let's make sure that small businesses understand what the regulatory hoops are that they're going to have to jump through up front, so that they don't spend a ton of time and effort on that, but they spend just a little bit of time and get their systems set up so that they can stay in compliance. Then it's not a focus that they're always having to deal with. They're not spending so much time on regulation. They're spending time making money or moving forward the mission of their nonprofit because they already know what they have to do in terms of regulation. And then after we give people kind of that list of stuff that they need to do to start a business, we get them plugged in locally. So whether that's the Small Business Development Center here in Gresham, or whether it's SCORE or Merit or MISO or AWAMI or you name it, we'll make sure that they get some help, because we know that statistically, people who get help with their business plan when they are at the starting stage, at startup stage, they maybe even haven't done proof of concept at that point, we know that they have a 40% better chance of survival if they get outside help, objective help. And the reason why this is so important is because you can't, from the inside, and I speak from personal experience, you cannot know the things you don't know. You can't. Sometimes you just have to have another set of eyes, like Sue was for me, or like many of the chamber execs were for me. So really quickly, I brought with me a fun little report. This is our annual report. It's the fastest, shortest annual report in history. I'm really proud of this. And we do these every year. You've got some on your table. You can crack the seals and open them up. And when you do, you'll see this great big old giant donut graph right here. And that giant donut graph gives you a very quick, high-level view of the sort of calls that come into our office and the emails and the people that walk in and say, oh my gosh, I have got a problem and I need your help. Or I think I've got a problem. Or is this a problem? Or I think we're going to start. But looking at this, you can see licensing is a huge issue. Huge issue. It was 44% of our casework last year. That shocked me. It really shocked me. I'd been watching it. It was about 34%, went up to 38, and I thought, that's not bad, not good. And then at the end of the year, we're at 44%. And so because of this, because of the growth in that sector, we've been sort of tracking this over the years that the office has been in existence. And so if you look over on this panel on the right-hand side, you can see some 3-year data on taxes, on procurement, and on licensing issues. So just to give you a sense of what it looks like when we work on a normal case, I thought I'd tell you about Julie. So Julie actually called with a startup question, and she lives in Central Oregon, and she said, we're kind of new, we're transplants from California, and I want to start an online store. And I said, great, what are you going to sell? I'm just curious at this point. And she says, well, I'm going to sell made in Oregon products. And she was very just Twitter-pated and excited with herself. I said, great, where are those coming from? Like, where are you procuring? What exactly is it you're going to sell? Because I'm thinking, if you're going to sell cannabis online, that might be an issue. So now I'm into ombudsman mode now, right? I'm just trying to protect her from risk. And she said, well, my son, my 16-year-old son, I think, makes beautiful inlaid cutting boards out of wood. And my daughter does, like jewelry, and she does some photography, and I just thought this would be a really good experience and a fun kind of family activity. So now, we're not just starting Julie's business, we're starting Julie's kids' businesses now. And it was so much fun. We probably spent an hour and a half on the phone because it was quite a bit of information. But I hooked her up with a site that helps kids write their own business plans. We talked about what the IRS in the state of Oregon say in terms of what's a hobby versus what's a business, so that she would know before her kids got to the point where they were at the tipping point for profit or the tipping point for revenues, where they're going to start doing earned income instead of just hobby. We talked about how she could invest in her kids' businesses, because she's like, well, they don't really, they haven't saved to buy materials. They haven't really thought about cash flow. And I said, Julie, what a learning opportunity for your kids. I mean, most kids, they may not have the opportunity to learn about cash flow in school with math, right? And I can tell you from personal experience, that was kind of a hard lesson for me to learn. Kind of a couple of times had to learn that lesson, but Julie's teaching it to her kids up front. And so she is investing in her kids' business because she can do that as a safe harbor under SEC rules with friends and family relationships. So she's investing. So we talked about then what does it take for a business to be ready for outside investment? What strings come along with that? Are they selling you a piece of equity in a business, or are you doing debt? Are they going to pay you back for that investment that you've made in their business? Fascinating conversation, super fun. And Julie's store is up. Now, at this point, they've only got one piece of photography, and I think it's a picture of their dog that her daughter did. However, that at least the wireframe, the framework is populated, and so pretty soon they'll be able to add in more inventory once it's crafted by her kids. And so it's pretty exciting and fun sort of story to illustrate the startup side of our work. Julie also did go to the Small Business Development Center to make sure that she got an outside eye on her business plan, rather than having us, we don't review business plans. It would be a tough spot for us to be in as a state, but the Small Business Development Center in Bend is just absolutely tops of their game, and so she made a visit there, and so she's all set up. And then her kids also know, like, where do you go when you want to be an entrepreneur? That's a place. That's a place where you go. So another quick case, we had an interesting call from Dan. Dan was for years a trainer, a celebrity trainer, I might add. So he flew all over the world in somebody else's private jet. And, they'd fly him to Milan to train some model, or they'd fly him to, Florida to train some football player. So he spent years doing this until he tired of the jet set lifestyle. And he decided he would take up his second love, and I always call it ruining a hobby. So his hobby was barbecue. So he decided he'd ruin his hobby by making a business out of it, and he started a great barbecue joint kind of up in Northwest Oregon. And he was doing really well. In fact, he had the only drive-in barbecue joint that he knew of in the state of Oregon. And all of his celebrity friends, whenever they came into Portland, would stop by. And they started having him cater their parties. And so he was making a pretty good living. And he had decided he was going to start a second location. And he was just going to dedicate the proceeds from that drive-through, just separate those out, and then save for that second location. Because you got to do tenant improvements. You got to buy new equipment. It's pretty significant, right? I'm looking at the restaurateur here, you know what I'm talking about. So then Dan is moving along with his plan. One day, the landlord comes to him and said, "Hey, Dan, great day. I sold the land under your business to the Department of Transportation for future use of right-of-way. And you have 6 months to move your business." 6 months, during which Christmas happened. Not only Christmas, but Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Now, Dan is probably not your average barbecue joint. His catering business ramped up significantly during the months or the days after Thanksgiving as Christmas and holiday parties start, through Christmas, over into the New Year. That's where he's making his nut for the year. That's what's going to help him solidify the business for the rest of the year. And he's now being told he has to find a new location, get tenant improvements done, and do it all within 6 months and not break any promises to his clients, most of whom are celebrities who are catering parties that other celebrities go to. Can you imagine what that would look like for a business owner to break a promise like that? Yeah. Not a good thing. And so Dan started working with the Department of Transportation to find out, look, are there any benefits to help move a business? And yes, it turns out there are, but he wasn't really clear on what they are. He just never received anything that said, this is what we can pay and what we can't pay, and this is how you have to get that. But he knew he was eligible for something, and he started working with a relocation specialist. But that relocation specialist was accustomed to working at the speed of traditional government, not at the speed of Dan. And knowing Dan personally now, after this experience, Dan doesn't move at the speed of business. Dan moves at the speed of Dan. He is Mach 2 with his hair on fire, and nothing stops this guy. And he finally called me up and he said, I have worn a hole in the wall at my restaurant, banging my head against it, because this guy cannot meet me to see if we can get a roll-up door in the new location. So we stepped in and we quantified what exactly are you eligible for in terms of benefits. We talked to ODOT Relocation Department, their division that does this work, and we said, look, here's the deal. He's making his nut for the year. If we screw this up, we're going to kill his business, and we're going to kill his reputation while we do that. So knowing that the stakes are high, can you make some exception and work a little bit closer to the speed of Dan and less the speed of traditional government? And they agreed, and they stepped up their game. And sure enough, within 6 months, actually just a little before, Dan moved into his new location. And I'm really pleased to report that Dan has hired 16 new employees. This is 16 FTE, by the way. His revenues are up over 300% from what they were at that previous location. This turned out to be both a crucible and a blessing in disguise. Having come through this horrible experience, Dan is thriving. Dan is raking it in. And now he probably can do that second location much more easily than he could before. The good thing about this is that afterwards, and this was to my utter and complete amazement, before I had a chance to call ODOT and say, okay, let's have a policy discussion about how we can do this better next time, they called me. They called me. This never happens, but it did this time. I was so impressed. They called me and they said, okay, we're going to have a staff meeting. Everybody from all over the state that does this work is going to be there, and we want you to come tell us what we did wrong. Wow. That is a teachable moment, my friends. And I seized that with both hands. I spent an hour and a half with these folks at their staff meeting and talked about what it meant to do business at the speed of business instead of the speed of government, about quantifying and managing expectations from right up front. Don't leave somebody in the dark. Communicate clearly. And if they have questions, communicate clearly again. Do it and do it and do it, and refine your processes until you are working for the business instead of them working for you. And they got it. They got it, and they changed their processes. They changed the level of expectation within their division about how they would respond. They no longer have an unlimited time period to respond to a business owner who is sending out a cry for help. Now they have a defined period with which they must do a response. So huge turnaround on the part of ODOT, and so I have to give them kudos for that. It's not always been easy dealing with them as an agency, but this showed their very best colors, and it showed that they really do want to improve. They really do realize that they are public servants and that they serve you. So I'm going to leave it at that and let you ask questions if you have them, and if we have any time left from all of the talking that I've done. But I thank you, regardless of whether or not there are questions, for your time and attention. It is just an unbelievable pleasure to be here.
So, question? Oh, come on, lunch wasn't
There we
that
go.
good.
That's what I'm here.
There we go. You might want to turn this up or on, or there we go.
Hi, Ruth again. Hey, at the beginning, you said that there were 3 or 4 bureaus or agencies within the state government that your organization doesn't deal with.
Yes.
One of them was BOLE, the other one was Secretary of State, I think. And what were the other ones?
The other two are the Department of Justice and the State Treasury.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and the reason why is that those agencies are not part of the executive branch. So it's kind of a fine distinction, but it was really important to Governor Brown when she was secretary and asking for this office to be created, that we be outside the executive branch, so that in the event that we have to criticize, and I've just described some criticism of the executive branch, that the work or that the advocate wouldn't be at risk. So when you have people who are ombudsmen that are embedded in their own agency or embedded within the branch of government that they're trying to criticize, it can be a problem for the work, it can be a problem for the people they're serving in terms of business owners and nonprofits, and it can put that ombudsman at risk.
Just a quick follow-up. Could you possibly reconsider your position with respect to BOLE?
Oh, could I reconsider my, I don't have the ability, so my position is codified in statute. The Office of Small Business Assistance is a statutory thing, and so, yeah, those limitations are statutory. However, I will tell you that if you don't already know about the BOLE Technical Assistance for Employers, it is a tremendous program that is firewalled off from the rest of BOLE. So if you call them, you can ask them any question, and they will not record your name, your business name, and they will never report it to the rest of BOLI. So even if you are in the middle of a problem with another division of BOLI, say a wage and hour claim that you're trying to clear up, or a civil rights issue, you can still call BOLI technical assistance for employers, but only the employers can call. So yeah, a tremendous program. So if you want contact information for that, I'm happy to give you that.
Ruth, could you repeat the name of that particular area slowly so everybody can get it?
Absolutely. So it's the Bureau of Labor and Industry, or BOLI, Technical Assistance for Employers. And you can find them, I think their email address is Bolita, which sounds really exciting. bolita@boli.state.or.us. But I'm happy to give you that in person or make an introduction to their manager. They're just a tremendous program, and we work very closely with BOLI Technical Assistance. They refer to us because they can't help businesses that are in certain circumstances, and we refer to them when we know we've got an employer who has questions that we can't answer or we can't help them.
Okay, another question? Brian, thank you for that. Oh, we got one over here.
Can you assist?
Just a minute. This is recorded, so we need it on that.
Can you assist people that are trying to get licensed with OLCC?
So can I assist people who are trying to get a license with OLCC? And generally, yeah. OLCC is definitely within the jurisdiction of the office, and we've done a lot of work both on the, sort of wine, beer, distilled spirits side and also on the cannabis side. So we're not one of those agencies or offices that are prohibited from working with cannabis businesses. So that's been a really interesting process. So yeah, if you have that issue, don't hesitate to call.
Ruth, are you seeing a lot of folks call you about the cannabis issue itself, trying to get things started or walk through the process?
So yeah, we did for a long time after the passage of, was it Measure 91? We saw literally the day after the election, the corporation division, which is it's a whole team of people. They have a call center that is in the same offices where we're located, and their phones went on fire. And just estimating, and they're guesstimating based on the names of businesses that people were filing at that time. Sort of Green America, the Joint on Main Street, obvious stuff like that, right? So people are doing those, and they're just taking kind of a rough tally, and we guessed that approximately 50% of the calls in it was like the next month, were cannabis businesses, whether they were growers, processors, testers or labs, or retailers, or even dispensaries that had never thought about being in this industry before were registering new entities. And we knew that a tsunami was coming to my office. Partly because there was quite a bit of legislative activity before the final rules were published with OLCC. And so during that time, there were a lot of completely legitimate questions from people about, what do I do in this situation? It's not listed anywhere. I never thought I'd see it, but there's marijuana.oregon.gov if you want information about how to be in compliance with the OLCC in terms of being part of the cannabis industry. And they've got a really great list of frequently asked questions, and we've been able to add a significant amount of questions to that because we had requests for information that OLCC wasn't able to respond to quickly enough. So really, in that case, we ended up sort of being an augmentation of the OLCC staff for a little while. Though we, of course, wouldn't license, but we can at least get those questions answered or those problems addressed as quickly as possible. That's now started to dwindle down, and now the thing that we're hearing from cannabis businesses is primarily from growers, and this is absent the question of, can I bank my proceeds? Because we get that every day. So, and y'all know the answer, because bankers stay at the Gresham Chamber, so y'all know the answer to that. But the question we're getting now is, I'm getting a form that allows, it's sent out to any agricultural operation, saying you have an ability to do annual withholding for your employees instead of quarterly withholding. And honestly, given that you have to take a bag of cash to Salem every time you do quarterly withholding, annual withholding makes a lot of sense just in terms of security, especially if you're paying someone else to do that work for you and to try and do it safely. So we're getting a lot of questions from people who get that form and don't know what it means, and have they set up their quarterlies properly, or have they even paid? So we're wading through those questions with them. So it's been a really interesting process.
Thank you, Ruth. Question?
Just curious, based on the same subject, are you in any position to see if we're getting an influx of larger companies into that industry in Oregon yet? Major agribusiness, any of that?
Not really. So we keep a lot of data from the cases that we do, and we feed that to policymakers so that they understand kind of the actual real problems that businesses are experiencing and the real questions that they're asking every single day. And so what you're seeing here is the high-level version. Legislators, or frankly anybody who wants to hear, I'm happy to give them a mouthful on what the detail is behind that. And the idea is that, particularly at the state level, this allows legislators the ability, if they wish, to make a sort of more targeted investments and more targeted, take a targeted approach to policy making. So that's the idea behind that. But no, we don't keep data on the size of the businesses that we're working with. I mean, we keep a list of employee numbers, but we're not seeing like 90 employee cannabis firms come to us. Primarily because the firms that are large enough to have that number of employees are usually sophisticated enough to have, they've got venture capital already, or they have a complex partnership structure. So, like if you're thinking about Chalice, that's a really good example of a huge operation that's vertically integrating, a lot of money in that operation, also a high degree of risk, but they're not going to come to us for help. They already have their own relationships, and they certainly have the means to hire their own lobbyists or people to help them with relationships. So yeah, they're not asking us for help.
When I was in the legislature 100 years ago, hemp was the big deal then, and that was the way that marijuana was going to come into Oregon, was through the hemp. And what I've found interesting is that hemp right now is the part of the industry that's being hurt the most. The hemp being used for clothing and those kinds of things are getting caught up in the drug side, if you will, of the marijuana
there
side.
are actually a lot of agriculture folks or people who are growers of other things, whether it's flowers or fruit or vegetables, who've decided to diversify into hemp because there are ways to grow, and I think it's CBD, the high CBD strains of hemp. CBD is thought to be the pain relieving part of sort of the cannabis family of plants, and I know I've got the genus wrong and all of that, but I do know some folks that have been in the business for years, or maybe like family farms, century farms, that are growing just a little bit of hemp. I'll say it is a really expensive high risk proposition. They don't know ahead of time if they're going to be able to sell their crop. They have to test frequently to make sure that the THC level in the plants is well below where it needs to be. Otherwise, it's considered cannabis and not hemp. And they're regulated by ag under hemp, and they're regulated by the OLCC under cannabis. Plus, the seeds themselves are thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's a huge, huge capital outlay in order to even just try this out. So primarily, we're seeing people who are well established and already have a solid financial footing for their agricultural operation, trying hemp and usually the high CBD strains, just to see if it'll work. So yeah, question over here. And while you're walking over there, I do want to add something, since it's sort of Bankers Day. I just want to add that bankers tend to be some of the best referral sources for our office that there are. And the reason is that bankers get a chance often to look from outside into a business's financials or a nonprofit's financials, and they see problems and weak spots that maybe the owner or the executive director doesn't see, and sometimes we'll get that call saying, hey, can you give them a hand? Can you give them a hand? And so I'd very much like for you to make that call, to feel free to just have that relationship with our office. Sorry.
Mayor Ryan?
Well, Riverview Community Bank Ryan right now. So wearing a banker's hat, when you have industries, family tree farms and other nurseries, and they decide to get into the cannabis business, make sure they create a separate entity and don't commingle all that, because when a bank finds out that they're doing that, they'll be exited.
Yes.
And it's very careful, because we have one thing that's happening in our world is that our compliance department is growing faster than any other part in any bank. And we have people watching that stuff all the time. And we've had to kick a couple out last week.
Right, yeah.
Very similar type scenarios too.
Really great point.
So that's something your office needs to tell people, is you can do this, but do not commingle it, or no matter how long you've been with that bank, they will ask you to leave. So.
Right, now we definitely already do that. We don't give legal advice or financial advice, but we walk right up to that line in terms of helping people understand what the ramifications are to their existing businesses or to their personal finance or their personal tax, the way that looks. So we're going to have a conversation with them if they're open to that. that. If they don't want to hear what we have to say, then we're not going to push it on them. But I appreciate that note because it confirms that what we're already doing is correct. And I would add something else. You know, we get a lot of people who are calling the office who don't know. They'll say, well, I want to file an S corp. Well, we don't do that at the state level. We file business corporations and LLCs, and so we sort of take people to business school, but we're having a very tailored conversation with them that is tailored to their sophistication level rather than ours, because this is not about us. This is about serving business owners where they're at, or nonprofits where they're at, so that they get the support that they need. But I really appreciate that, because you're just telling me we're doing a good job.
We have time for 2 more questions. Dorothea, here you go.
I was down in Southern Oregon, and they have the Medford Mail, the paper. And in the op-ed section, there was an article on marijuana and how the economy down there has changed from credit cards to cash. And from what the article said, the money is from the marijuana, they're going into retail businesses, spending buku bucks, and then the retailer's the one that's going to have to put the money in the bank. And I don't, I mean, it must be legal, but it sure puts a lot of pressure on the retailer.
It does. And so you bring up a really, really good point. I was talking with a credit union employee, and this was probably a year and a half ago. And we were having a conversation about the cannabis industry and, you know, how it was emerging. And she said, you know, this is terrible, but we've had someone who's banked with us, personal banking and business banking for years. He has a security firm, so he does security systems for businesses and for homes and so forth. And all of a sudden, he started making a lot of cash deposits. And eventually, the bank caught on, and there was a red flag on his account. So they called him up and they said, hey, so, because banks have to abide by, I'm going to step out on a ledge here because I'm not a banker, they have to abide by know your customer laws. They have to understand at least something of the provenance of where the money comes from. So they said, so what's all the cash deposits? This is unusual behavior for you. And frankly, the money smells. And he said, oh my gosh, I've got all this business. I've got more business than I can handle. I'm hiring new people because all these cannabis places have cropped up, and the OLCC has all these rules about security and blah, 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 blah. And we're just going great guns. It's awesome. And they had to say, I'm sorry, we have to close your accounts. And in that case, they also closed his personal accounts. And so this is a completely legitimate business owner who had no idea this was coming, who's been doing business the traditional way, writing checks, accepting credit cards, all of that stuff for all of this time, paying his quarterly withholding for his employees without any trouble, filing taxes, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, his taxes look completely different. All of a sudden, he now has to go to Salem with a bag of money every quarter and make an appointment with the Department of Revenue and walk into the special room that is ventilated specially and have them count the money. And this is a person who did not see it coming. And so we always tell people who are doing business in kind of a fringe industry that's serving the cannabis industry to proceed with great care. And to be aware that they may come to the point where that's going to happen to them, and it's probably better to engage their bank up front rather than try and kind of skate under the radar. I do know a couple of growers that are, you know, they've given their operations very sort of, you know, like llama farms, happy smiley farms, like nothing, you know, there's nothing about cannabis in the name. And they're trying to sort of fool the bank into letting them just kind of slide below the radar. But they are one by one. Banks are catching on, credit unions are catching on. And I still only know of one credit union that's on a very, very limited basis doing only grower accounts. So that may have changed now, but that was the last information that I had. So we don't have a place we can refer.
One last question.
Over here.
Oh, Larry?
That's all right.
Thanks, Ruth. And this may be, well, it is probably a little outside of your bailiwick, but maybe you've got some insights. Why doesn't the state open the Bank of Oregon for these folks? I mean, there's so much security risk for them carrying the cash down, among other things, that I think it should be something that's supported in one fashion or another. And maybe the state can actually make some money off of the deal, too.
Right. So the question is, why doesn't the state open a bank that could serve these folks? And that, my friend, is a policy can of worms that I'm not going to open here. So, because I can see it. I can see it. This is going to go on MetroEast, and then the Gresham Outlook is going to say, small business advocate says blah blah. So yeah, no, that's not my thing. There are 90 legislators that I can refer you to, and they'd be happy to talk with you about that. And certainly, I'm sure the treasurer would love to have a conversation with you about that. So, but thanks for the question anyway. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I very much appreciate it.
I thought it interesting that Ruth said the day after the election, the phones are ringing off the hook. It was smoking hot. And now it just sounds different when she says smoking hot. So, a different view of our government, don't you think? When Brian started, he said, from the government. I'm here to help. I'm with the government. I'm here to help. Well, if it's Ruth, open the door, because she definitely knows her stuff. I want to thank our sponsors again. Riverview Community Bank as our presenting sponsor, thank you very, very much. Portland General Electric and Gresham Barlow School District as our stakeholders, and MetroEast Community Media. Don't forget the flyers so that you can enjoy what you saw a second time. It would be very wonderful if you would fill out on your table the questionnaires. That helps us make sure that our programming suits your needs. If you have a suggestion, you want to let us know if you appreciated or liked what Ruth had to say or her presentation. It's helpful for her as well. I want to announce that June's upcoming topic was going to be cannabis, but we don't know for sure if it's going to be or not. I know, but there's something else that has come up that's more topical, immediate. Cannabis is going to be with us forever, it sounds like. So anyway, but in July, we are partnering with EME, with the East Metro Economic Alliance, and with the West Columbia Gorge Chamber. All three organizations are going to partner here and have a legislative wrap-up. Keep your fingers crossed that they'll actually be wrapped up. It's at the end of July, so watch for that coming. We appreciate that partnership. And other than that, unless there's something else for the good of the order, thank you for coming today. We appreciate you, and see you next month.